Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, we've heard all the slogans, we've heard about the rolling mall of initiatives and the brighter future for New Zealand, we've heard about how this government is ambitious for New Zealand, we've heard about the step change, we've heard all the slogans, but we haven't seen a plan. We haven't seen a plan to improve New Zealand. The only thing that we've heard in terms of tourism is this we're kicking the tyres. That's what the Prime Minister says. But in terms of tourism, when you kick the tyres on a cycleway, somebody's bound to fall off their bike. And I'll tell you what's happening now in terms of tourism is that what is falling is the domestic numbers of people around domestic tourism. Those New Zealanders who can afford to go off and have a holiday somewhere around New Zealand. See, domestic tourism has fallen by 10%. 10% less guest nights in the over the last recent while. In the North Island, 4% less guest nights. In the South Island, 9%. People cannot afford these days, under this government, to actually just go off and have a holiday, to have a bit of rest, to get away. That's because there's nothing that this government has done that's actually putting more money in people's pockets. People cannot afford to go off on holiday now. And this is before GST, 2.5% increase in GST. This was before the ETS trading scheme bumped up the cost of petrol. People cannot afford now, before all those things have really kicked in, to go on holiday. And so what does this mean for tourist people in the domestic market? Moteliers, they're struggling. They're struggling. Because of the lack of plan from the government, people in the tourist industry, such as moteliers, they don't have the number of people staying in the motels so that they can actually make a living. And there's anecdotal evidence that in the Hawke's Bay alone, some of the motel, nights, the capacity is down to 10 to 15% guest nights capacity is being used. Mr Chair, the government's lack of plan for New Zealand is actually having a detrimental effect on the Prime Minister's ministry, that is the Ministry of Tourism. The big step change has actually been to consume the Ministry of Tourism into the Ministry of Economic Development. What's actually happening there is that we now have a minister who doesn't actually have a ministry, because the whole ministry, the Ministry of Tourism, is being consumed. It's been taken up by the Ministry of Economic Development. And I asked the question of the Prime Minister, where are the unique issues of the Ministry of Tourism, of the tourism sector, where are they going to be heard? Who's going to listen to them? How are their unique issues going to be addressed if the Ministry of Tourism is swallowed up and consumed by the Ministry of Economic Development? Mr Chair, this is a backward step, not a step change for the tourism industry in New Zealand. And we all know that tourism is right up there. It's one of New Zealand's biggest economic earners. It brings in, it's our second largest export earner. Quite frankly, those people in the domestic tourism scene, they are struggling just to make ends meet. But what was the other step change from the Prime Minister, from this government? It was around mining. If there's one thing that is really going to damage the New Zealand tourism sector, it's to start mining the most pristine areas of our country. Why the Prime Minister, as the Minister of Tourism, thinks that mining and digging up underneath the Mount Aspiring, why digging up under the national parks, why digging up the Great Barrier Island or the Coromandel was ever going to be an idea that flew, I don't know, because the tourism sector themselves were telling the Prime Minister, this is not a good idea. It's not 100% pure, it's 100% stupid. Mining New Zealand, mining our national parks, it was just never ever going to fly, and it harms our international reputation. People are not going to leave their homes in England and Europe and come over here and creating a huge carbon footprint in their travel just to come to a country that isn't going to live up to its 100% pure image and reputation. Anecdotally, sorry, it wasn't even anecdotally, we had reports from people who were saying, Why would we travel all the way to New Zealand when we could just go to Norway and see lakes and rivers and fjords?
The question is that Amy